Path of Exile 2's closed beta starts in less than 5 months. It begins on June 7th, 2024, and as we leap toward that date, Grinding Gear Games is insistent on communicating with the community as much as possible. The latest Path of Exile 2 interview was conducted by a trio of classic Path of Exile content creators, ZiggyD, Nugi, and RaizQT. They had the privilege to speak with Jonathan Rogers, one of 2 game directors on POE2, and Rory, a lead game designer focusing on skills for POE2. Just a quick note here, the devs in this interview were phenomenal. They worked with these longtime players of their game to think on the fly and really develop on the fly. There are many suggestions that happened in this interview that Jonathan, the game director for POE2, flat out said, "Yeah, I think we're actually going to implement something akin to that." Phenomenal idea. And there was a set of other ideas that he said he would look into. That type of development and that type of transparency with the community is vital, and it's one of the best aspects about this newfound launch of Path of Exile 2. It's a return to the past for Grinding Gear Games and Path of Exile, and I am excited to see it. Secondly, I do have the flu right now, so I am sorry if I don't sound as hyped or well-spoken as usual. Now, without further ado, let's get to it. ZiggyD started the interview out by asking, are the POE1 and POE2 endgames still combined? What is the endgame plan for POE2? Jonathan responds and says, we haven't announced a plan, but we have the overall design. Maps will be the main thing, but they would like it to feel like an evolution compared to POE1. It will be in the closed beta, and to answer the combined part, they are not combined as they are completely separate games. For example, all the POE2 bosses from the campaign will be in POE2's mapping system, just as in POE1 many of the POE1 map bosses are from the POE1 campaign. There are changes to the POE2 endgame system that are being made while not removing anything that can currently be done. For example, the Atlas passive skill tree. The thing people love about the endgame in POE1 is that there are many different things to do and you can choose what to do. This will just be amplified in POE2. Me speaking now, that's phenomenal, and it assuages many fears that people had when there was the mention of, oh yeah, the endgame will be different, the Atlas passive skill tree won't be in there. Well, it will be in there, just in a different form. And the best part about POE1 presently, being able to completely sculpt your own endgame, something that is causing many more people to play longer and enjoy the game more, is going to be at the forefront of Path of Exile 2. Now, there are also some endgame systems alongside maps that they haven't revealed yet, and those reveals will come in good time. RaizQT asked the next question, saying, do you plan to change the high-end power level in POE2? Will you still be able to one-shot entire packs or Uber bosses? Rory responded and said, they didn't even design the POE1 Ubers to be one-shot. But yes, they are intending this is not going to be as accessible, especially at first. The boss fights shall all last and they shall push players to their maximum. However, since the players are given a massive number of tools, they will be able to accomplish feats such as these. Jonathan followed up and said, people learn the game super well. We see that now with POE1, and they learn it better than the devs know the game at times. At this start of POE2, this probably won't be possible, but once people figure out the game, that stuff, one-shotting packs and Uber bosses, will come. Another question from Jonathan is, how fast will tools like POB come into POE2? How powerful will those tools be? There's a ton changing that you were able to rely on in the past that will be entirely revamped in POE2. Things like defense formulas, damage stacking, and so on. The ZiggyD devs are super excited for this reset. Nothing is off the table for changes at this point, and they know players will be able to break the game and destroy it as they have with POE1. However, it'll probably be at a lesser level than is currently possible in POE1. Nugi asked the next question and said, in previous interviews, ZiggyD spoke about a difference in drops between a novice and experienced players, set at a factor of 1,000. In POE2, there seems to be a flatter curve. Do you intend to force this difference through other means, or will the gains be lesser? Jonathan responded and said, force is the wrong word here. We're not forcing this to happen at all. You need to have the ability to have your character be better than other people's characters to matter. A 10x difference is not enough in Jonathan's eyes. There are so many factors to look at. Look at clear speed and damage. If both are 10x, they can do 10x more difficult content for way more rewards. That's only 100. Even just understanding a map's layout, that can be a 10x multiplier in terms of player power. The challenge isn't keeping it above 1,000 times, it's keeping it away from 100,000 or more, which is where POE1 is currently at. Jonathan talked with Chris about why Magic Find gear is good in this regard. It comes down to needing the game to have some access of scaling that isn't just DPS and defense. It's another major element that matters in your character build. However, Magic Find should never beat damage. When you're at the point where your damage can take down anything, that's only when MF comes in. And I do also agree with this now. I was a big MF hater. I did not like the way they explained it in the past, but hearing it in this regard, seeing that it will be changed in POE2, and we're about to get to that in this next question, I am actually kind of looking forward to this, and I don't think it will be as egregious as it is and probably will remain in Path of Exile 1. Like I said, ZiggyD follows up and asks, why do you think Magic Find gear is unpopular? Jonathan responds and says, interesting question. Rory then steps in as Jonathan was stumbling a bit and says, the way it scales in POE1 mostly is the bad thing. The more you have, it scales exponentially. Grabbing a bit isn't good at all. They haven't done the balance for Magic Find in POE2 yet. They need to look at the drop code and the Magic Find formulas. The equation for how Magic Find gear has diminishing returns is weird and cryptic, and nobody at the company currently understands it, so they need to kind of revamp that. They don't want people to do lower tier content with Magic Find gear and getting huge rewards. They do not like it, and it was a mistake given all the other content paths in the game. Me talking now, they are directly referencing the tier 7 cemetery farm currently going on in Affliction. People are finding that this is probably the most profitable method to make currency and find the best items in the game in all the Path of Exile right now. Anything else with that level of investment cannot match. They don't want that to occur in POE2, and they're going to do a lot of work to make sure that isn't the case. ZiggyD asked a question about the weapon passive skill trees. With the multiple weapon passive skill trees, what doesn't snapshot or carry over? Jonathan and Rory kind of collaborated on this answer. They said, the only thing that doesn't snapshot are your permanent effects, like auras or permanent minions. Those update and everything else dynamically swaps. If you cast a fireball in weapon set 1, then swap to weapon set 2, the fireball will still use weapon set 1 statistics. This allows for big combos. They want this to be varied. They don't want everyone to simply use a main skill weapon set and a curse weapon setup. They should be dynamic and unique. They admit it's a balancing nightmare, but they are willing to take it on even if it's 3 or 4 times harder than POE1 balancing. And it's lovely how they're unafraid and unabashedly admitting that Path of Exile 2's balance is going to be drastically harder than Path of Exile 1's, even though it's a fresh game. Imagine the weapon swapping, the 36 ascendancy classes, all the new skill and support gems mashing together. It's going to be wild to behold, and I cannot wait to be a part of that opening wave in the closed beta if I am lucky enough to get in. We are going to be the guinea pigs. RaizQT asked the next question, can you talk more about Spirit and why you're moving away from mana reservation? Can you reserve life? Rory responds and says, it's to make mana matter more. Right now, people optimize mana away and try to use it all for auras. Rory came up with this system they're using now for POE1, then rediscovered it for POE2. It was a cascading effect of problem fixes. They will likely have a support gem that causes life to be reserved, maybe even mana. They just don't want to accidentally make it the same as POE1, where everyone is reserving away all their resources and mana does not matter at all. The normal thing for auras and meta gems should be to use the spirit bar. You can get spirit from quests, items like an amulet base, the passive skill tree, and scepters from minion-focused builds. Now here's another thing that I wasn't a huge fan on upon initially hearing about it. I like kind of being able to optimize away mana, but that's because of how it's currently designed in POE1. It's just purely annoying having to worry about mana when you could be using mana regeneration like your flask slot for something so much more powerful. If it's built innately into POE2's system that mana is going to be a resource for almost all characters, and you can use spirit for all these other things that you're currently using mana for in POE1, I'm actually fine with it. Okay, here's a big question from Nugi. How do you feel about changes in POE2 compared to POE1's defenses? Jonathan responded and said, he won't touch on POE1 as he's not the expert in that field anymore. That's more for Mark and Chris. In POE2, it's not the case that every character should be running auras or even defensive auras. The game is also being more strict, wherein gear adds flat modifiers while the tree is more multiplicative along with auras. This means something like Determination or Grace won't be the one-stop shop to solve all defense problems. Rory adds in POE2, there isn't any way to get flat additive defense values on your gear. Rory adds that in POE2, flat additive defense values are much rarer. When you add lots of flat values, everyone gets closer to a singular value. When you add something multiplicatively, it makes someone already doing something well even better. This idea transfers to support gems too. They asked should they be specializing tools or despecializing tools. They came to the realization they should primarily be despecializing tools, causing people to make more and more difficult decisions and choices about their gem setup. It's the opposite of what you might originally think, but they now understand this is the way to go, even if it wasn't immediately explicit. For example, a skill should be a specializing tool. Support gems shouldn't be. The example they gave was an Ignite support gem shouldn't make a skill that does Ignite better at Ignite. The tree should do that. This support gem should make a skill that is bad at Ignite viable at Ignite. This was all a long-winded answer of saying Grace and Determination will not be the goats of defenses anymore. Now, this is me talking. This sounds phenomenal for build variety. Being able to change up almost any skill in all of Path of Exile 2 is going to make the game feel like POE1 right now with the Transfigured Gems. If you can turn any skill into an Ignite skill, a Bleed skill, a Shock skill, you have a lot of experimentation to behold in that journey. And there's going to be a ton of builds in POE2 with all this at our fingertips. The next question was from ZiggyD. How does Energy Shield factor into POE2? Rory responded and said, it's not like life where you can get constant massive amounts back without serious shenanigans. There is currently no flat energy shield on the tree, just like there's no life on the tree in POE2. It's going to be less reliable at the outset than life. And this is a big change that we haven't discussed much on the channel, but yeah, life is not on the tree in POE2. You're going to be relying on your gear much more for defenses and flat values like life. And it's going to make gearing way more interesting. ZiggyD then asked, how do you feel about time to death in POE1 and will it be different in POE2? Jonathan responded and said, obviously we want to make sure signaling attacks is always good in POE2. The time to death in POE1 is probably too short, but he wants to stress the fact that they're not going overboard with changing it. What they will not be is a game with a life pool, and it's grinding down over 30 seconds, very slowly, inching its way towards zero. The life pool will change a ton, but being hit by a huge attack means it will take a longer time to get back to full. They're not working in milliseconds like it is in POE1, it's going to be longer than that, but not titanically slow. This is a good change. That's what we want from an action game. We don't want to slowly grind our way down to zero over the course of 30 seconds, like he said in there. We want our life to be shifting dynamically and we'll have to react to what's going on the screen. It's not going to be instant like POE1, or at least that's the hope. There will be a big hit from a boss that will take 75% of your life, and you'll really need to focus on being defensive while you regenerate that life, either through leech, your potions, or other methods. That's cool. I like that feel that they're going with in POE2. RaizQT asked the next question about vendors. To what extent will you be able to gear through vendors? Jonathan responded and said, vendors will not be a large part. That's not correct. You should want to go to vendors and look at their items, but they don't think the primary source of items on your character will be vendors. It's basically going to help in early game with filling out the holes in your character. It is an explicit goal to get items on the ground to matter more, but you won't need to identify items from the ground for minutes on end after a map. More is coming soon that they need to reveal with itemization. When some of the big itemization changes were first pitched to Chris, and remember we don't know what these changes are yet, Chris Wilson responded and said, what the hell, we're not doing this. But eventually, Jonathan Rogers got Chris to come around, and he actually likes them now, so that's interesting. To a player who doesn't understand PoE, these changes to itemization might mean nothing, but for someone who does understand the game, these changes will be massive. They are trying to find a fix for not maxing out item quantity, but instead making items on the ground with higher item rarity far better. They also want to scale pack size down a bit, but they never want to tailor loot drops to the character or character class like in other games like Diablo 3. Okay, the more I hear about Magic Find and the more it's explained by Jonathan Rogers and other devs, the more it makes sense to me. Right now in POE1, I think it's egregious. In POE2, that doesn't seem to be the case. And the fact that they are consciously trying to put less items on the ground, but all the items are going to be better, and I really do think it's just going to be increased modifier tiers, stuff like that. I think that's going to be great. I know the pack size answer might worry some people, but they also still said they want to make it ridiculous when you load into a map sometimes and the packs are massive. They just want the visual clarity to be better than it is currently in POE1. Nugi asked the next question, are there crafting items you regret adding in? Jonathan responded and said, Orbs of Scouring and the original Chaos Orb implementation. They couldn't have seen the super spam or non-spam unfolding in the way it did. And what he's talking about here is the fact that people scour something and then alt it over and over and over and over, and they try to get certain mods on it, and they don't use the Chaos Orb for its original intention. That's why it's all changed in POE2, where the Chaos Orb removes a mod and adds a mod, the Orb of Alteration is gone, and the Orb of Scouring is also gone. ZiggyD asked the next question, and it's a good one, and it's a very short answer. Are GG drops still desired, like big mods from Delve or Fractured items? Jonathan responded simply and said, yeah, that is a huge goal. They want you to care about the items that drop on the ground, and they want you to have those big moments of, oh yes, this is a good mod. Sounds good to me. I like that. It's really cool to find those awesome mods in POE1 and want to craft an item with them. Although I think it will be easier in POE2 with the way the crafting has changed from what we've heard. ZiggyD asked another one, a short one. Are Transfigured Gems and Vaal Gems in POE2? Jonathan responded and said, Vaal Gems would work great in POE2. They have to explore it, but they know it'd work very well. So here's another non-answer like the cinematic question from the last interview. Can neither confirm nor deny what's going on. I think Vaal Gems will be in POE2 based on this answer. Following up to this, RaizQT asked, were Transfigured Gems in POE1 a success? Jonathan responded and said, yes, they were. We're unsure if they'll be in POE2 as each are super handcrafted and in-depth. In POE1, they will constantly be adding new Transfigured Gems with every expansion. That is great to hear. As a Cleave of Rage enjoyer, I can't wait to see what they do next with the melee skill gem because you know I will be playing it in POE1. RaizQT asks a massive question here from many people out there. Will people still be able to play one-click builds in POE2? Rory responds and says, he cannot see a way where it'd be more efficient, but it will be possible. Jonathan knows there will be ways to do it, but it would be tricky to work around. They also have tons of automation opportunities in POE2. They have cast on dodge roll, cast on shock. It's happening everywhere, and people will be able to optimize around it. If you present good build options though to improve builds, you might be convinced to do more than a one-button build because you'll be enticed to do more damage and more abilities and more things in the game. Jonathan also wanted everybody to know he wonders how good the zero-button builds will be. So, once again, people, they're listening to the community and they know that there's going to be stuff in POE2 that allows you to play one button, zero button, like the Fulcrum Chieftain in POE1 right now with Affliction. Oh my gosh, zero button builds right there. It's going to be wild, and I cannot wait to see what people do with this vast array of tools in the closed beta. Ooh, another big question from ZiggyD. Have you thought about mandatory buffs like melee and totems in POE2? Rory responded and said, they are not focusing on big buffs that you need to have up all the time in POE2. You are more focused on comboing skills together. Melee isn't great in POE1. They want POE2 to have melee totems, but they don't want them to be annoying and a necessity. They won't be adding a massive damage buff to the character's damage. You won't need them in every melee build. This might be the plan for POE1 as well. They'll have to look at it. Recasting is also a problem, but it will be a build you can spec into if you really want to build melee totems in POE2. Oh my goodness, as a melee enjoyer and someone who's done melee the past few leagues, the past 3 leagues actually, with Cleave, Bone Shatter, and Frostblades, this is amazing to hear. I don't want it to be necessary. Just recasting them over and over, it's not like a buff, guys. It's not like something that you cast on your character. It's a physical block that you have to stand around and be cognizant of in a fight. It's basically like a damage over time effect that you need to not stay away from, but stay near. And I am not a fan of that, so this is cool to hear about going into POE2. This was also one of those questions where they really discussed it, went back and forth on the potential options. So big shout out to both Rory and Jonathan for their response here. RaizQT asked another juicy question. My goodness, so many juicy questions in this interview. Will item pickup radius be increased in POE2? And will there be a pickup nearest item like on console? Jonathan goes all out and says, yes, it will increase in POE2 due to the implementation of WASD. They need to solve it. They don't know how far it's going to be. It needs to be large enough to not stand in ground degens and ensure the feeling is good. This will also likely apply to door opening and levers too. They also want to make this change for talking to NPCs as well. Nothing on the pickup nearest item like on console. They'll look into it. I can hear a million exiles out there all cheering in just pure joy and bliss. Good news. Nothing else to say on that. Make it happen in POE1 as well. Now we have a barrage of pretty short questions here from the interviewers. Nugi asked, what is your stance on Boward Power in league mechanics in POE2? Jonathan responded and said, yeah, it's something they will probably do. It's nice to have a way to create the feeling of immense power in a league without it sticking around. However, it's probably not something every league will have. and what they're talking about here are the Crucible weapon passive skill trees. They're talking about the charms and affliction. Those are definitely going away. All the different tattoos and Trial of the Ancestors. Lots of leagues have had borrowed power, and it's felt great. You're able to build new, fresh, exciting characters. And after that, it's just the new league, juicy, new special mechanic you're looking at, and that's fun. ZiggyD asks another question. With POE2's enemies being more difficult, will POE2 move away from lingering or on-death effects? Now, this answer from Jonathan actually convinced me of their stance on the topic. Jonathan responded and said he thinks they will have a place in POE2. It's not so much involved with these effects lasting with the final monster and trying to gotcha on that final monster, but how the effects affect the encounter when you are still battling other monsters. Wow, this is something that I hadn't thought about, and it's totally right. When you are fighting huge packs of monsters that have on-death effects, it drastically changes the battlefield, even with the super fast combat in POE1. On my Cleave of Rage character, when there are packs that have lots of on-death effects, I have to move differently around. I have to use the terrain to my advantage. I have to know, okay, I can leap slam in this direction to dodge, or, oh, I can use my Vaal Molten Shell to withstand this massive blast of on-death effects while clearing this last rare monster. It's cool, and I didn't think of it in that way before. So I love them opening my eyes to new just ideas on how the game is designed, because I really just thought it was annoyance before. So this is good. I like the answer. I know people hate on-death effects, but it looks like they're not changing them really in POE2. RaizQT asks, will POE2's early game respecking be easier than POE1? Jonathan simply says he doesn't think it's too far off. They're happy with it. And remember, in another interview with Mark simply said, hey, early game, you make a mistake, can't respec, just restart your character. There you go. Time to reroll. Now, this is harsh, but it's one of the things that makes PoE unique. Your decisions matter in this game, and that permanence until you hit late endgame, right, is what grasps a certain set of people and makes the game not perfect for everyone. Now, they're making a lot of other changes that are helping make this game easier for people who wouldn't normally play it. WASD, the item radius pickup, all these graphical improvements, the animation improvements, all that stuff. But some things they are not budging on. Nugi asked a cool question. Are there any formerly impossible challenges like desync that are not possible to fix in POE2? Jonathan responded and said WASD was a huge one. That would have appeared to be too hard in POE1. Rory says tiny changes like many impacts now being frame perfect instead of being off was something they couldn't solve in POE1 but is now in POE2. Jonathan followed up and said he does not want to see things as impossible to fix ever. He doesn't like that attitude. He then asked for an example from Nugi. Nugi said, oh, the item pickup radius, but now that seems to be changing too. Jonathan then kind of went back at him and said, oh, well, item pickup radius isn't a technically difficult change. It's really not hard. Instead, it would change the entire game feel. It's nebulous, a hard question to answer properly. It changes the world feel they want to communicate to the players. And that makes sense. It follows up on what I just said in that last question. They have a set design of the world, and they want to maintain that in POE2. Oh, this is a big one, everyone. ZiggyD asked, I'm happy about pausing in the game as a recent father. Any more details on it? Jonathan responds and says, that's one of the things that might have seemed impossible, but it's not. We stopped making excuses and just did it. When you disconnect from the game is paused. They might even be able to implement a pause on lag feature in single player. When paused, you can also see what debuffs do, how much damage your skills are doing and such, but you cannot swap out gear and skills. You can also chat while paused, making trades in intense moments way easier. Also, you can pause in party play if everyone pauses, but anyone can unpause at any time, making it dangerous. Simply, once everyone has paused, the game is paused. Things like opening the passive tree also pause the game. And this is another one where the devs were going back and forth with Raiz, Nugi, and ZiggyD on, okay, this is a problem in hardcore where people die when there's a lag spike. Can you pause the game when there is a lag spike? And Jonathan basically said, I think that's possible. Yeah, you're right. I think we can do that. We're going to check on it, but I don't see anything inhibiting that. We're going to make this happen. Great win for every hardcore player out there, everyone. Nugi then asked, they have designed 40 leagues so far. What can we expect from POE2 leagues? Jonathan responded and said, the question is hard to answer because there are so many small lessons all the time. First of all, it needs to affect the game from the start. You need a meta progression system. You need something that affects combat. You need a story element. You need a crafting aspect. There's probably 2 more things that he's missing, but he can't remember them in the moment. They noob out sometimes and go back to mistakes like they're doing with Affliction, where you can juice your maps at maximum with very little investment. POE2's development has reduced the amount of time they can do big stuff like Delve in former leagues that were huge. once POE2 is launched, they think leagues for POE1 and POE2 will be able to have brand new, huge places to explore like in POE1. POE2 has assets so old as well, they're replacing them and then using the old assets in POE1. It has been a long road. I want to latch on to the first part of this question and answer. It sounds exactly like the best game development video I've ever seen out there. It's Chris Wilson's talk at a game dev conference, where he's essentially talking about the formula for Path of Exile and why it's so successful. If you haven't seen it before, go look it up. I think it's called something along the lines of Path of Exile, making a game that will last forever. Something along those lines. It's the best. I might do a react to it eventually. If you want me to, let me know in the comments below. ZiggyD asks, is the 3 to 4 month league cycle staying around? Jonathan said, yes, they like the 3-month better. Once POE2 is out, POE1 and 2 will have 3-month expansions going forward. It's the optimal time. It makes them the most money. They will have staggered leagues, 1 month between a POE1 to POE2 league, and 2 months between POE2 and POE1 leagues. Oh my goodness, everyone. We will be eating well. Our families will miss us greatly. We'll disappear from everything. We won't ever be able to touch grass. Oh, it's going to be wild. And I couldn't be more excited. ZiggyD asked, how does pushiness affect content in POE2? Jonathan responded and defined pushiness for us. In POE2, every monster has a pushiness value, which is the degree to which they can move other monsters and objects. This pushiness interacts with various skills and attacks in many ways, with cool combos to behold. They didn't want a ton of penetration in POE2, meaning monsters intersecting each other. While being pushed, you cannot pathfind, but you can take actions. The same goes for monsters, and there was no phasing in Path of Exile 2. So the goal with this really seems for them to make the game feel more realistic, feel meatier. And I'm on board with that, honestly, especially because we've seen the monster hitboxes in Path of Exile 2 aren't squares or circles or whatever they are in Path of Exile 1, where every hitbox is basically the same and they had a maximum size. The giant fight in Path of Exile 2 that has been showcased is a great example. You can dodge between the legs of the giant. So they have basically pinpoint accurate models that won't touch each other, but instead will push, or if you're not touching them, you'll be able to evade around. That's super cool and it's exciting. I'm happy to go ahead and play it and see how it feels though, because I know it's going to be a big difference from Path of Exile 1. ZiggyD asks, will the crafting currency changes have changes to map rolling? Jonathan just said, oh yes. And of course it will. There's no more Orbs of Scouring. When you roll a bricking mod to your build, you need to adjust your build or sell your map. It's gonna be wild. Or, I'm not a seal, you will have to use a Chaos Orb to gamble and try to get that bad mod off and add another mod on. Oh, it's going to be interesting. Oh, I can't wait to experience that in POE2. ZiggyD asks another question, do you have a content map for POE2? Jonathan responds and says, we'll be talking a bunch about POE2 as it's its launch year. It's going to be coming quick, all this information. And we know that the next reveal is probably going to be the Witch and Minions, and I'd guess it's sometime in January. They'll also be doing lots of podcasts and video interviews with content creators, so be on the lookout for any of those that might be coming in the next month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, until the launch of the closed beta. Nugi then asked, what is your current ambition for POE2? How long do you want it to go? Jonathan responded and said, easily as long as POE1. They are a long-term game. It's going to keep going for a while. Good to hear. I am a mono gamer. Keep this well, I will be a dual gamer with POE1 and POE2 coming out. So keep them up. GGG. Big question here from RaizQT. How will POE1 MTX being in POE2 impact immersion? Jonathan responds and says, it is the case that it will affect it. It's unfortunate. Making MTX transferable was more important and player-friendly than the costs of seeing shiny, flashy things in POE2 in towns. Anything 5 years old or younger will look great in POE2, but older stuff, it'll look worse. And yeah, props to them for doing this. Lots of other companies would not make this happen. I can't wait to use all my challenge rewards in POE2 instantly. ZiggyD then asked, will all POE1 stash tabs transfer over? Jonathan responded very interestingly and said, yes. Almost all stash tabs will still be usable in POE2, and they will of course transfer whenever a system is implemented in POE2. He basically said all the ones that are currently in POE1 will have uses in POE2, except the div card one, which ZiggyD called him out on. So that means stuff like fossils and other leagues that have stash tabs. Ooh, they're probably going to be in POE2. How exciting. ZiggyD then asked, will Shards and Splinters be gone in POE2? Jonathan responded and said, no, they want a ton of content and they want it to be tradable. So the Shard and Splinter system with keys and such are here to stay. Great. Okay, it's fine. I understand that there's a problem with picking up tons of tiny ones, which is only really a problem with Breach right now, but otherwise, it's in a good spot in my opinion. And finally, the last question was, ZiggyD, when can we expect the next content reveal for POE2? Jonathan said, no announcements, but it's soon. I'll also be posting more on Reddit soon to give more content for Talkative Try to discuss. He shouted me out. I cannot believe this. That was wonderful. And like I said, I have the flu. When I heard that, I leapt up, immediately threw up, I know TMI, and then yelled downstairs to my wife, oh my goodness, Jonathan Rogers just mentioned me on the podcast with ZiggyD, RaizQT, and Nugi. This is wild. It was amazing. Thanks for the shout out, Jonathan. I will be covering everything, as you know. So what did you think about that interview? Are you excited for more to be coming in the future? Will the witch be the next class to be revealed? All of it will be set in stone in good time. Anyways, that's all for this video. Tala Moana, Exile.